Okay, so on Friday, we did our first FRQ. This is consider the following. Now, two things. One, if you were here, I gave you credit for it. So this is more of your baseline to see how well you remembered some of the material and how well you can actually answer them in essay form. Remember that you don't have to do the essays like you do in your English classes. You don't need an intro. You don't need a body. You don't need a conclusion. Just get to the point. Now, the other thing is when we do these, consider the followings, these FRQs will be much shorter. They should take you no more than like 5-7 minutes. This one was a lot bigger. When you do take the AP Biology exam, the first two FRQs that you'll be doing on the actual test are the big ones, the 20-minute ones, and they're 10 points. All right, so you were asked to select 3 of the 4 macromolecules that are in nature and do 3 things with them. In part A, you had to identify their structural components, basically what elements they're made up of and what are their monomers. How are they constructed on their most basic level. The second part was identify 2 examples of each of the macromolecules you chose and briefly describe their function. And then part 3, you were asked to describe the process by which the monomers are able to link together to form polymers. So just by sitting here in class today, you're going to get a few insider tips on what to do and what not to do when you get problems like this. And when you see certain words, what should you do when you see those words? I'm going to give you guys a lot of help today. All right, part A. Let me make this full screen. Okay. This part had 6 points possible. I told you on Friday it was 10 points for the whole FRQ. It was actually 14. But there are 37 points on the board. You only needed 14 to get a full perfect score. So if you chose carbohydrates, here's what you needed to write. You have 5 things you could have written. You only needed to get 2. 1, if you said carbohydrates are polymers that are made up of monosaccharides, that's a point. But I'm going to tell you what. This is one of those learning moments. If you just say what the monomers are, that's not going to cut it because remember that a polymer are monomers bonded together. Now, if I were a grader in New York or Philadelphia grading your essay, if you just said that carbohydrates are made up of monomers called monosaccharides, I'm going to be on the fence of whether you get credit or not because you didn't say anything about bonding. Now, if you said that they're monosaccharides bonded together, that's great. You got your point. Moving on. Next, if you said that they have a molecular formula CH2O, which is a way of saying that their elements are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in a 1:2:1 ratio. Like glucose is C6H12O6. If you reduce that, it's CH2O. When the number is 1, you don't say 1. You don't say C1H2O1. You just say CH2O. If you said there's a hydroxyl, which is also a hydroxide group attached to each carbon, that will count. If you said that one of the carbon contains a carbonyl group, that will count. Or if you said that in an aqueous solution, and you guys took a Latin quiz a couple weeks ago where you had aqua on there, aqua means water. In an aqueous solution, many monosaccharides form rings, like a hexose or a pentose. I'll take that. If you didn't necessarily say in an aqueous solution, but you did say that like the monosaccharides are made up of a hexose or a pentose, I'll take that. Are there any questions with carbs if you chose carbs? Ooh, see those thumbtacks? Try slamming them into the wall. Okay. Let's go to lipids. 1 point for the following. You have 2 points possible, you only need to get 1. They consist mostly of hydrocarbons, which are carbon chains surrounded by hydrogens. There's very little oxygen found in lipids. You can also say that they are triglycerides, which consist of a single glycerol and 3 fatty acids. So in this one, you are mentioning the monomers. Again. And I'll give you a what? I'll say what? I'll give you a third point. Actually, no, I don't need to because it's down here. I got another one. Next, glycerol is an alcohol with 3 carbons. Fatty acids are long hydrocarbon chains with a carboxyl group at one end. Unsaturated fatty acid chains contain 1 or more double bonds between carbons, causing kinks in the chain, while saturated fatty acid chains do not contain double bonds. So, remember we discussed the difference between a saturated and an unsaturated fat. Saturated has as many hydrogens as you can possibly get, and unsaturated has at least 1 double bond between the carbons, which means you do not have as many hydrogens as you can get. The unsaturated is called an oil, and it's liquid at room temp. It comes from plants. The saturated is called fat. It is solid at room temp. It comes from animals. You could have said phospholipids consist of a glycerol, 2 fatty acids, and a phosphate. Now, for the phospholipids, if you did not say glycerol, it's okay. You didn't need to. But you do need to mention the fatty acids, the 2 fatty acids in the phosphate group. And then you have steroids. Consist of 4 carbon rings with no fatty acid tails. I vividly remember saying that during our notes on lipids. Steroids, and I drew a 4 carbon ring structure. Any questions on carbohydrates or lipids? Yes?
So I talked about the fatty acids in the glycerol in part B. Would that be wrong then? In wrong spot?
No. Wait. Yes, because in part B, it's asking you to identify specific examples of a lipid.
Yeah,
What you did is you were identifying what it's made of.
Okay,
That's
so
what you needed for A.
I was just kind of confused because the lipids, it's either the triglycerides, phospholipids, or steroids. So I didn't know, like, should we have just picked one type to explain and do the examples?
Well, you could have said we'll get to that when we get to part B, but for part B for lipids, the 2 examples, you could have said a triglyceride is body fat used for insulation, shock absorption, and long-term energy, and a phospholipid is used for the cell membrane of the cell.
I did that.
Okay, then you get the points for B, but saying what the monomers are for part B is not what it was asking. It was asking you for the structural components was part A. All right, continuing on. Part A rubric. Continued. Proteins. You get 1 point if you said that a protein is just a chain of amino acids, and there's that word again, bonded together, peptide bonds. I would be really on the fence if I was a grader and the student said that proteins are made up of amino acids, but they didn't mention the bonding together. Then you could have said that a protein is a 3D globular shape. If you didn't say globular, that's all right. Globular, it looks like a glob or a blob. It's just a bunch of peptides bent and contorted into their 3D shape so they can do whatever their job is. Continuing on, the other point you could have gotten for proteins, amino acids are molecules that consist of a carboxyl group, an amino group, and an R group. If I were to actually write this down, this hopefully looks familiar to you. You have your essential carbon in the middle. On the right, you have a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, and then bonded to an oxygen and a hydrogen here. This right here is called your carboxyl group. It is also known as carboxylic acid. Nitrogen bonded to 2 hydrogens is known as a amine group or amino group. And then you have your R group. The R group is what makes every amino acid different. It's a different type of molecule that you plug into it. Imagine that all of this is you. You know, that's like your body. The R group are your different types of clothes, like different types of shirts. You got a sweater, you got a tank top, you got a Hollister shirt, you got a Lightning jersey. They're all different. And they look different on you. They make you look different. But you don't change. This is you. These are all your different outfits. And every outfit is what makes an amino acid different. There are some that are polar. There are some that are non-polar. It causes every amino acid to bend and twist in a very specific way. Do you remember how many different amino acids are there in nature? 20 on the dot. All right, you could have said that the interactions created by the R groups on different amino acids result in the unique folding of an individual polypeptide. Okay, moving on. Nucleic acids, the last one. You get 1 point if you said that a nucleic acid consists of nucleotide monomers. The nucleotides are made up of or you could have said they're made up of a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogenous base. Next point. If you said the backbone of DNA created by phosphate groups of one nucleotide forming strong covalent bonds with the sugar of the next nucleotide. Remember this little prop from last week? The yellow things are bonds. The reds are the phosphate groups. The blacks are the sugars. So it alternates. Sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. That's what makes up the backbone of DNA. And then you have RNA is a single helix, that would be a point, and DNA is a double helix, that would be a point. And that's all of part A for a total possible score of 6 points max. So add up your point value so far and we'll move on to part B. Okay, part B. It says for each group that you chose, discuss 2 examples of the molecules that belong to each of the groups that you chose. Briefly describe their function. Now, I have a little PTSD from this, but here's the good news for you. My PTSD comes from my students during quarantine in April and May, when we were doing e-learning, which was very different than how it is now. And some got it wrong, and I'll tell you exactly what they missed out on so you can learn from their mistake. A lot of them would disregard the second sentence. They would only answer the first. You cannot do that. You will be penalized for it. And by penalized, I mean you won't have points taken away. You just won't get more points. You'll be denied the points. So and I'm telling you, I'm having flashbacks to 2019 school year. Discuss 2 examples of molecules, and they'll do that. They'll mention them, but they won't describe them. You have to make sure you answer anything. You can't just willingly disregard a part of the question or the prompt. So if you had carbohydrates, if you mention any of the monosaccharides we talked about, glucose, fructose, galactose, even the nucleic acid sugars, ribose, pentose, deoxyribose, you get a point if you also said their function. It's just energy. Energy, energy, energy. If all you said was glucose, that's it, glucose, you didn't do the second part. And I'm not going to have anyone call themselves out on that, but I know that there is some in this room that didn't read the second part, or they didn't do it. There's a lesson to be learned in every mistake. Don't continue on that. Next, if you said starch is plant energy storage in their roots, there's something about starch being energy storage in plants. That's a point. Cellulose makes up the cell wall of a plant. That's a point. Glycogen is animal short-term energy storage. We put in our muscles and our liver. There's a point. Chitin is the structural material found in the cell walls of a fungus and the exoskeleton of arthropods. That's a point. And then peptidoglycan, the structural material used in bacterial cell walls. There was a student from last period that asked, what if for chitin, I just said it makes cell walls? Could you guys see a hole in that answer? Why do you think that wouldn't be as good as it could have been? If I were just to say, chitin makes up cell walls, what am I missing? No. Cell wall is protection. There's something else. The type of organism it belongs to. Plants have a cell wall. Fungi have a cell wall. Bacteria have a cell wall. I would think, devil's advocate here, okay, chitin makes up cell walls of what? Cell walls of what? I don't know. There's multiple types of organisms out there with a cell wall. Plants have cell walls. Fungi have cell walls. Bacteria have cell walls. Some protists have cell walls. So you have to be as specific as you can. Moving on to lipids. 1 point for each of the following, 2 points max. Triglycerides. Energy storage, insulation, shock absorption. You try to punch somebody in the beer belly, they don't even feel it. That's shock absorption. If you ever saw someone like overweight and you're not sweating in a room, it might be like 75 degrees or 80 degrees. You're not sweating, but they are. They have more insulation than you. There's more fat there. And then we all know that body fat is long-term energy storage. Cartman on South Park would say, "I'm not fat, I'm just full of potential." It's technically right. It's long-term energy potential. Yeah, Mitchell? Oh, that's falling too? Jeez. All right, moving on. Phospholipids. If you said phospholipids are the main structural component of cell membranes where they form a bilayer, there's a point. Waxes are lipids that serve as coatings for plant parts and as animal coverings. For plants, it's really, it's called the cuticle. If you ever see a leaf that looks really shiny, it's likely covered in wax and is meant to protect the leaf from being eaten by bugs. And then steroids. It's a component of the animal cell membrane, but it's also used to form some sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. If you chose any one of those two, you got your 2 points. Yeah.
If we just said saturated fat in cell membrane, those technically aren't molecules, right?
Right. Those are monomers. That would be more of a part A. Okay, let's move on to proteins. 1 point for each of the following. There's a lot of opportunities here. If you mention enzymes, they speed up chemical reactions. You got it. Antibodies. They're part of your immune system. They help identify foreign pathogens and they try to stop them from invading your body. That's a point. Speaking of antibodies, there's a lot of talk with COVID-19 antibody tests. If Mitchell got a COVID-19 antibody test and he tested negative, what does that say about him in COVID-19? If he tested negative for COVID-19 antibodies, anybody know? Yes. He never had the disease. Typically, when you are exposed to a disease, and if you survive it, you developed an immunity to it. So let's say that he tested for the antibodies and he tested negative. He never had the antibodies. So if he does get sick, he has no means to fight it off. But suppose Hannah tested positive. What does that mean? She tested positive for the antibodies. She had it at some point. So if she got it again, does she have a built-in defense now? Yes. For those of you that might have gotten the HPV vaccine, the Gardasil vaccine, hopefully you don't get exposed to that in your life. But if it does happen, you have a already built-in immunity for it, opposed to someone who hasn't been exposed, hasn't gotten the vaccine. They get exposed to HPV for the first time. They have no built-in immunity. They could get sick. If you took a blood sample from me, and you would find chickenpox antibodies. I had it when I was a little kid, and I'm going to have the antibodies for the rest of my life. All right, so those are proteins. Hemoglobin in your blood, that helps carry oxygen throughout your blood. That would count. If you mentioned the elastin and collagen in your connective tissue, your skin, your tendons, your ligaments, your cartilage, I'll take that. Keratin in your hair and your hair and fingernails, providing structure and support, I'll take that. There are a lot of possibilities of proteins here. Anybody have one I didn't mention or not on the screen that you want to ask to see if it'll count? Probably will. All right, let's move on to nucleic acids then. You get 1 point if you said DNA, stores genetic material. I'll just leave it at that. If you said DNA is an example of a nucleic acid and it stores genetic material, you have a point. If you said RNA helps provide, or it functions in the actual creation of a protein, I'll take that. And I had a student in first period ask, what if I mentioned a specific RNA? I said, okay, what'd you write? It was rRNA. rRNA helps compose the ribosome, which is where proteins are assembled. You got it. That's it. So I'll take that. Yes.
Like for protein, what if I wrote they also help create muscle and tissue?
I'll take that. Yeah, that would be actin and myosin. Make sure you know that. So here's what I'm saying. And this is me putting on the shoes of a grader from Philly, New York. You said protein. helps make muscle and tissue. The prompt asked you to name 2 specific examples of protein that do that. So what you would want to say is, like, the actin and myosin are examples of protein that help in the structure of muscle and tissue. So it's not direct. Protein is the big word, and then you need to find little examples. Yeah. Purine and pyrimidines are nitrogenous bases that make up nucleic acid monomers. That would be more of an answer for part A. Okay, part C. All these groups of molecules are created from monomers, joining to form polymers. Explain the process that joins these molecules, these molecules 2 points possible. All right, my PTSD is firing up again. Okay, you guys get 1 point if you simply wrote the words dehydration synthesis. You get a point. This is what sometimes really makes me shake my head, and it's not because I'm frustrated, it's because I'm just thinking it's a shame. That's why I think, oh, it's a shame. Too bad. You don't have to write a sentence, you don't have to write a paragraph, you don't have to write a big blurb, just write 2 words. That's it. You would be astonished on the actual College Board AP exam. If you just say the vocab word, you get the credit, or at least you get a point towards your total. Now, in the past, I have had students, the prompt will ask you for the word, and the students define it perfectly. They just don't say it. So they can't get both points. Or you flip that. They say the word, dehydration synthesis, but they can't define it or explain it. You have to be able to do both. When I first started teaching AP Bio, it was kind of like my first game, or it was kind of like Tom Brady's first game of the Bucks. It could have been better. And I didn't have a lot of students pass, but the ones I did have pass, I invited them to my AP Biology class the next year. And I said, okay, what was your secret? How did you pass? And this one girl says, vocab, vocab, vocab. Use as much vocab as you can. Don't just blurt out words all over the place to make yourself sound smart. Use them appropriately, and it'll go a long way. So be sure you guys are studying your vocab terms. There's flashcards on Mastering Biology on the study area. Use those. It's a lot of help. So if you simply said dehydration synthesis, you get 1 point. And if you defined or described it, you get the other point. You got monomers are linked together by covalent bonds, and water is lost from the 2 joining molecules. Remember that you take hydroxide from one side, hydrogen from the other, and they come together to form a larger molecule. And just for good measure, what do you call that process where you reintroduce water to separate the molecules again? Hydrolysis. Okay. So there were 14 points that you needed to get a perfect score. And perfect is asking a lot. Hopefully you sniffed it. Somewhere close. There were 37 points out there. It's like going out on an Easter egg hunt with 37 eggs on the ground, and you're told just find 14 and you win. You get a perfect score, first place. So I would say a score between 9 and 14, maybe 8 and 14 would be what you should be looking for. Anybody get something between an 8 and a 14? Yeah. Okay. Well, this is also your first one. And the good news is this is September. By May, you guys are going to be seeing these FRQs and just say, I got this. It's going to be easy. It's like riding a bike. You're going to crash a few times, skin your knee, knock a tooth out, right? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, yeah. But eventually, you never forget. You get only better and better. Okay. So you can put your FRQ